I'm one of 12. That doesn't happen very much anymore. So I have 7 biological siblings and then 5 that are adopted. And several of them have special needs. I have an adult brother with autism and cognitive impairments. I have a sister with cerebral palsy who relies on a wheelchair. And then I have another brother with some learning disabilities. So kind of from a young age, I became an advocate, excuse me, for kids and young adults with special needs, but I didn't realize I was doing it. I just sort of got thrown into it. And growing up in our church setting, people really made an effort to include our family. So if you've ever met a person with autism or even with cerebral palsy, sometimes they get really excited. And our pastor would just say, oh, the Spirit's just, with them right now. That's okay. And just carry on with church. And I think that sort of really is what connects me with my faith and disability. And I also feel very privileged to do this, and I'm very excited you all invited me to talk. Come on in. If you can grab a handout off, yeah, Sonia has the handouts, and then we have pens there too. Yeah. Okay. I always joke that Lutherans are on their own time. So in our church, we call it Lutheran time, where we just, we walk in and that's okay.
In the old days, it was always early.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, times change, right? So on the handouts, I sort of did an overview on the first page, and so I'm going to be referencing the handout a lot. As some of you saw, we tried to get the laptop, but I'm more of a pen and paper kind of person anyway, so I hope that's okay with you all. Now, we did, and Ron had a good name for it. He called it a baptism by coffee. So some of my handouts got a little splashed with coffee this morning. So I'm going to hand out, when I reference additional resources in this packet, I'm going to hand these out, and then we could send them electronically or make copies for another time. I do apologize for that. It was just kind of one of those things that happen. So I'm going to pass these to some of the tables. So these are just to lead through later on and share, okay? And then I only have 2, I'm sorry. Okay. So just reviewing the overview, kind of had some goals, and I'm hoping too to get some goals from you all. This is a good sized group, so hopefully we can have a lot of engagement in the conversation. So the topic I'm presenting on today is building community, so best practices for engaging and supporting our neighbors with special needs. And so some of the goals that I came up with were identifying common barriers for neighbors with disabilities, exploring biases and discomforts about ability and how to address those, review ways to improve your communication with neighbors with special needs, and then learn about resources and where to find them and how to offer those to folks with disabilities. And I'm just curious, are there any other topics or things that you would like me to review or questions that you might have before we get started?
Do you care to define your definition of disability?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely go over that. I do go into that a little bit, but no, but let's start with that now. So to me, ability, disability, sometimes I'll use jargon, and so if I'm using something and you're not sure what it is, just raise your hand. I can go into a little bit further explanation. So to me, a disability is something, and it doesn't have to be physical. It could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be a difference with your ability to learn, but something that impacts your ability to do a task or to be independent. And there is a whole range. So like I said, you can have cognitive impairments, which means maybe you have a learning disability. And I'll talk about this later, back in, not even that far ago, we used to use the term mental retardation. That really has been thankfully kind of become obsolete. So the correct term that we use in the social work field and in the medical field is either cognitive impairment or developmental disability. So if you hear that someone is globally developmentally delayed, that usually means they have a high level of cognitive impairment, meaning, sometimes they don't learn the way that maybe other people do. Their speech or their communication might be different, things like that. And then there's physical disability. So if we think of disability, we sometimes think of folks in a wheelchair, but you can have physical disabilities that range from being very mobile and active to being very immobile and dependent. So, excuse me. So if there's ever a time during this presentation where you're kind of wondering, does that fit the definition? I think sort of think about it as, is it something that impacts their access to a community or to an independent living? Any other questions or things like that?
Yeah. Are you including mental illness?
Mental illness, I think, when we talk about that, I think it's something that co-occurs with disability, and I think that's often overlooked. I would say that there are some mental illnesses that impair someone's functioning to the level that it would be very similar to having either a cognitive impairment or a physical disability, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah, no, thank you, I appreciate that. And then I just have a couple of requests. So if you're talking, and hopefully this goes without saying, but I just always, when I do presentations, I like to sort of talk about the language I use and stuff like that. Using person first language, so a common one is the autistic man. So maybe saying the man with autism or something like that, okay? And in that first page of those supplemental handouts, there's a whole list of that, and again, we'll get that out to you guys at a later time. Respecting different learning styles, so I don't see a lot of cell phones out, but some people, I always like to say, if you're a note taker, that's great. If you're not a note taker, that's okay too, and just sort of, if someone's asking a lot of points of clarification, not making assumptions that they're trying to, show off or something, that just might be how they learn. And then I would love for you to ask questions. You're already doing that, so thank you. I like to engage more in a communication style rather than me just talking at you for a whole hour. And then throughout the presentation, we're gonna have some moments where you're sort of talking amongst your groups, giving answers, things like that, okay? And then what expectations do you all have of this group? So are there certain, I don't like the term ground rules, but things that we would like the group to know during conversations, or things we would like to be mindful or respectful of? Sure. Have you all met in this group together before and things like, okay. All right, so, maybe you don't have to raise your hand, it's not a classroom, but trying not to talk over one another, that sort of thing. I don't anticipate that as a problem. It seems like a pretty calm crowd. All right. Any other questions before we get started?
Oh, I had a question.
Yes.
I wondered about your background and your...
Yes, yeah, I can go over that. Yep, so I'm a medical social worker by trade. I work at University of Michigan Health System, now called Michigan Medicine. We went through that whole thing. We had a name change and we didn't tell anyone.
That's weird.
Yeah, we do that at the U from time to time.
You told the third parties.
I did tell the third party, but you know what? When I call insurances sometimes, if I say Michigan Medicine, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's pretty funny, because that's who pays us. So I work at the Pediatric Rehab Center at U of M. And so we treat children 0 to 26 with children and young adults with differing needs. So physical needs, cognitive impairments, things like that. So common diagnoses that we see are cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injuries, autism, and then we do care for kids with complex issues and pain. And then just to give a little bit of background about myself personally, I shared that I'm also a Lutheran from a much smaller church also called Zion Lutheran, so that's kind of fun. And then I'm also a big sister to several children and now young adults with special needs. So I have a brother with autism, I have a sister with cerebral palsy, I have another brother with some learning disabilities. So this is a topic that's sort of near and dear to me, both professionally and personally. And I'm just really excited to be here. So, is that a good summary of my spiel? Okay, awesome. All right, so if you can turn to the second page in your packets, where it says breaking down barriers, we're going to kind of dive into the common barriers that, that individuals with disabilities often face. And I think when we think of barriers, the first thing we think of is physical, right? That door is not handicap accessible. There's not an elevator. You all in this church do a beautiful job. I saw signs everywhere in First Town. Not every place or community has that. But the World Health Organization actually goes further with the definition of barriers. And they explain that it's not only physical. I mean, physical is a huge part, and that's what we see in our day-to-day, but there's also a lot of kind of hidden or not as pronounced barriers that people with disabilities often face. And so some of those include a lack of relevant technology. So one of the big things for people with disabilities is communication. You know, if you've ever met someone who has a speech problem or can't generate speech with their voice, communicating with them is very, very difficult. And in our society, we haven't quite caught up to all the different technology and how to use that with someone. So you might meet someone with a speech device, and just show up of hands. Have you met someone that utilizes a speech device for their day-to-day communication? Yeah. So, okay, so I'm just curious, when you first met that person, and they might be a grandchild or a son or daughter or someone that you just met, how did that go the first time? Did you?
We have Alan Gordon, who's a member.
Okay,
very
great.
active, but he was in an accident
Yeah.
25 years ago. He can't talk.
Okay.
But he has his tablet with him all the time.
Yes.
And the first time, you know, I met him,
He opens it up.
he opens it up and
Yeah.
just writes everything down.
Right.
Like he just had surgery, so he opened it up today and said, oh, you know, I'm out of the hospital, and that kind of
Good.
And he does Facebook all the time.
Yes. Okay.
He's really good about that.
So it's really taken off in these recent years, right? So Facebook, the Amazon Echo is another really great thing. So, you know, now we see all those funny commercials about it, but a lot of people with disabilities use it. So it's slowly coming in, but I'm sure maybe talking to him the first time, you know, he initiates it, but I think one of those barriers is, how do I initiate a conversation with that person? We'll go over that a little bit. It seems, so that's great that you all have someone here in your congregation that you can engage with, because that's actually not very common. And even for myself, I think my first time meeting someone who needed a speech device, it wasn't until I was a social worker myself. And this is me who went to lots of therapy locations and stuff like that as a kid. So, okay. Stigma, fear, and negative attitudes towards differences associated with disability. So we're going to go into implicit and explicit bias and what that looks like. But I think we're still living in a world where people are either scared or don't know enough, and those that fear or negativity sort of creates a divide socially for people with disabilities. And then the other big one is services, systems, and policies that don't exist or leave huge gaps in services that hinder the health or well-being of people with special needs. So these can be things as big as insurance programs, so insurance not recognizing certain disabilities or you know, not offering the same level of coverage, or it can be something as, you know, kind of like small potatoes as not, you know, like not having the right type of parking spaces outside of a small business or a museum or something like that. And so it really ranges, and I think that those policies and systemic barriers that we see, we're seeing the community kind of try to get things moved along, but with anything with policy changes, it goes very slow, and so that's something we'll go over a little bit more. And then
To what extent do the third parties influence your definitions and communication usage?
yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great, so you're, just to clarify so third parties, you're referring to like insurance programs, stuff like that, and how we communicate with them about disability? Yeah, absolutely. So,
Your definition of disability.
yes, no, that's, because I think that there are booklets, there's 100-page booklets that these insurance companies come up with, right? And they, in black and white, define disabilities, right? So a really common one for not only kids but adults with special needs is access to therapies. So for adults, and I'll share this with you all, adults who maybe have, let's say, cerebral palsy, okay? So they were born with something that affects one or all of their limbs, and they can't either walk or move the same way. And what we know is that staying in therapy and staying active is the best thing for these folks. You know, and that it's the best for all of us, but definitely for someone whose muscles work differently. And so for the longest time, especially for adults, that was seen as a chronic condition, and any therapies were viewed as habilitative. And in big letters, habilitative therapies are not covered for adults because they're already done developing. Why do they need supports and things like that? And so in the medical field, what we've really had to do is alter our language and talk about why it's rehabilitative, why keeping up with therapies is important for maybe a 50-year-old with cerebral palsy, just as important as it is for a 3-year-old who's still developing. I could probably talk for 5 days about insurance and then some, but I think you're exactly right, where we've had to really alter how we present things to insurance companies and even to different agencies about an individual's needs to get the job done. So it doesn't feel good, and you can imagine that for someone who's in an advocacy role, it doesn't feel good for me. It doesn't feel good for that person, right? You know, and I will say, and some of my moms and dads and patients have gotten used to my spiel. They're like, yeah, we gotta do worst case scenario. So when we're doing this level of advocacy, we're sometimes saying, you know, the result of not getting therapies is, you know, paralyzation or death, you know, and that seems really bad to have to go all the way and say something scary like that about a patient's care just to get something as simple as therapies covered. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay. So then just going through, the World Health Organization then breaks down these barriers into 7 groups. There's definitely more than 7 groups, but these are the 7 sort of topics. This is a weird word for me to say, so bear with me. Attitudinal, I don't think I would ever, I would say more like stigma, stereotyping. Those are, so that sort of prejudice and discrimination against folks with disabilities. Communication, which we talked about, so either difficulty with hearing, speaking, reading, writing, or understanding. Physical, so that's the most common one that we think about when we think about barriers. So structures, obstacles, things that prevent or block access or mobility. Policy, so the insurance is a really good example of policy barriers. The other big thing about policy is if I use the term ADA, so American with Disabilities Act, do I need to go over that a little bit, or do we go, okay. So that's something that's really changed, but it wasn't that long ago. You know, we think about it, it's only been about 30 years, a little bit over. And people with disabilities have existed long before, even in biblical times, right? And I think that's just to show it took really until this century to start putting things in place to respect the rights of people with disabilities. So it's slow going. Programmatic, so programs are services that don't quite meet the needs of people with disabilities. Social, and this is one thing we're going to kind of go into a lot today, so that communication and how to engage with people with disabilities. Again, I think Facebook has done some really amazing things in social media, but at the end of the day, all of your interactions are not going to be online. And I think that goes both ways, right? Like you can kind of put something on Facebook about ability, but it's sort of showing your action and things like that really matters to the community. And then transportation. I think transportation in my role is one of the biggest barriers for children and young adults with getting their services. But if you're someone who drives your own car or has access to a car, it kind of like falls down on the priority list. So we'll talk about that a bit. So kind of for your first activity, and bear with me, we can do it more as like a big group discussion, or you can discuss at your smaller groups. But I said break into groups, but we can just sort of stay at our tables. We don't have to do much movement or things like that. And kind of picking one of the 7 topics, I'd like you to come up with one example of that barrier, either that you see in your community or you've thought of. I won't say it's cheating if you use one that I already said, but like I might challenge you a little bit further. And then as a group, brainstorm possible ways to acknowledge and address that barrier. So maybe if we could do, let's see, if maybe half the table wants to do attitudes and stereotypes, and then you all do communication on this side, and then the gentleman in the blue shirt to maybe the gentleman in the orange shirt, if you could do physical, and then do policies. And then since this table's the biggest, we'll have you do programmatic, social, and transportation, if that's okay. And then I can always jump in on one of the tables too as well, okay? All right. So we'll just take a couple minutes, so if you want to come up with an example, and then I'll kind of float around here, okay? Sorry, I think everyone worked great. You all are better with us. I guess 3 out of 3. I think she did, but let's see. One more mind. Yeah, we're going to so she can talk to us. Exactly. So she is for my mom. She hobbles on the couch, and I go when she's and I dance and teach her when we get out. And if somebody's probably thinking I'm like a yeah, but she's gone by the time somebody's like going. Yes, like she looks like she was going. What is it? Well, this is
yeah, I know.
well, this is doctor. Oh, did you? Okay. My dad took life rehabilitation and offered life that's open
So I sent her to
Okay.
We're getting better. That's hard for me to remember.
Yes, I checked it.
And then I sent her a list. I have a with a and she's
Give them a list of what
You're talking about leadership. I was it was a panel day one day. And I sort of got and everything. And I said to him, oh, you know, he's talking about
Did you draw the super? But anyway, what is she saying? One thing that I can think of is, yeah, when I was, because my dad would always you know, you walking on the sidewalk,
maybe father, son.
they want
yes. Even though you're
So,
you and I are in a wheelchair, we're going to get a right? The thing is,
they don't ever take you other places.
well, my mom, so I think that is a different meaning of it. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're correct. I think that it's the way I saw somebody like it, sorry, and here, like, taking part of her and at what point do I ask them, you don't want to do the, yes. You know, you think
say your example that you came up with, and sort of, we can discuss those as a group, okay? So I'll start, we'll start here and kind of move this way, so, kind of the attitudes and, oh, attitudes, excuse me, sorry.
What we talk about is if somebody's blind, then they think they're deaf and everything else too.
Okay, yep, so making assumptions about someone with one disability having multiple disability and not really, so saying something rude possibly because you think that person also can't hear or speak. Okay, yeah.
Down on the level, if somebody's in a wheelchair, they're down.
Yeah. Absolutely, we're gonna go over some of those, so that's a really good example. What about communication?
So Marge and I discussed this, and we talked about the fact that for many of these single modalities, there's hearing aids for hearing, and there's supposedly areas of the chancellor where they can hear well. For each one, there's talking books. If you can't write, there's talk to text. Apps now. So for each one, it seems like we might be able to do something. But if you have an impairment in multiple ones, that makes it much more complicated.
Right.
And the one that we found the most difficult to come up with good solutions was understanding.
Yeah.
Because that can be cognitive impairment. And Marge and I are different here. I immediately think of the elderly when I think of cognitive impairment. Marge was thinking of young children.
Yes.
With cognitive impairment. So,
That's where I come from.
and so we were wondering, like in the schools, what kinds of things are there for cognitive impairment in children?
Absolutely. So we can definitely go over that because I think that really feeds into adulthood, right? So with cognitive impairments and understanding, you're meeting people where they're at, I'm very sorry I got to keep referencing this handout, but I'm gonna steal it off your table real quick. I will share these and hopefully we can, because I think this is sort of one of my favorite resources is with folks, I'm gonna go back a little bit here. So with folks with cognitive impairments or difficult understanding, just to give the example, meeting them where they're at means, schools or other people do testing to sort of figure out their level of understanding, and we really have gone away from IQ, right? IQ is a number, but it doesn't totally look at the whole picture of a child or a person. So, back in the day, it used to be, okay, your IQ is under a certain level, you go right into this type of classroom. Well, now what we've kind of learned is, even if a child is not understanding academically what's going on, they're still understanding socially, and we work on the skills that they seem to be making progress in. For example, my mom works with kids with autism. She doesn't do a whole lot with numbers or writing that those first months of school. She does sitting on the floor and going to the bathroom and, maintaining a level of engagement in a classroom setting. And then once they kind of get those skills, then it's moving up to the more learning skills. So it's much slower, the progression is there. And then to just sort of reference this handout here, and again, I'll try to pass this along. There is a group actually in the hometown where I grew up, Wyoming, Michigan, which is right outside of Grand Rapids. It's called CLC. Yes, they have really great resources where they want everyone to be able to access worship. And so they give suggestions for inclusive language, but then the other great resource that they have is an order of worship. So we looked at our pamphlets or leaflets or whatever you call it, lots of words, right? And so meeting someone with a cognitive impairment is maybe doing a more visual schedule or something of that nature, where the image matches up with the words, and then kind of working with their helpers and things like that. So I'll pass this around just to look through, but it's a really great resource, okay? And then I think one of the other people's has this packet too, so that's great.
I can scan the packet, and then next week, if people want it, they give me their email address, I can just send it to them.
Yeah, actually, Ron has it electronically, so yeah, so if you want to sort of share that amongst the group, that would be great. And then real quick, we'll move over to physical and policy. Yes.
And I think the challenge in physical is
putting yourself in the person's shoes and trying to
Absolutely.
figure out if you had that situation, you know, what would be a problem. Two we thought of, one was people being blind on sidewalks and hedges being,
Yep.
you know, up high
Yep.
barriers that are really not a good clue if you're using a cane.
Yes, absolutely.
And the other one was even just as we're in spaces and let's say we see an elderly person, you know, we need to make a little room. I had an example of going somewhere with my mom in a small waiting room and her tripping over people when they might have noticed that she's 98 years old and walking through this room. So just
Yeah.
physically moving for people.
Well, we're talking about
Oh, go ahead,
store,
please.
too.
Yeah.
Being at Myers.
Yeah.
You see somebody that's either got a walker or in one of the little motorized stores. At times, you feel uncomfortable asking them if they need help.
Yep.
Well, go ahead and ask. If they get insulted, well, you did your best.
You guys are so good. We're going to talk about that next. So, so I have some like very kind of basic tips, and that's actually one of the #1 ones is how do we offer help and how do we respond to situations where we see someone might need some help. It's really important to be mindful of that. So that's great. What about policies?
One good,
You got the tricky one. I'm so
the
sorry.
example we came up with actually wasn't that tricky because it involved handicap parking spaces. and
Yes.
the lack of enforcement
Yeah.
of handicap parking spaces. And of course, this.
It's like I knew that might come up. So tell me a little bit about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just what I was saying is that you see people parking who don't have handicap
Yeah.
tags or license plates in handicap spaces, and often you don't notice them being ticketed or anything. They just park there.
Or they have the tag for their loved one, but then when their loved one's not with them, they still always park in handicap.
We actually talked about it too, so we're going to laugh.
That's
We had a situation where our daughter worked at a restaurant, and they had a handicapped parking spot with the blue lines next to it.
Yep.
And the manager parked on the blue lines.
Oh, man.
We called corporate on it because we asked our daughter, who was, because we always saw it parked there. He said, well, that's the manager, he thinks he can park there. And we called the corporate office and said, please instruct your managers that that is not their parking spot.
Yes.
Things were arranged
Good for
to come
you.
down and things.
So in this mysterious packet that I keep referencing, I have a little handout about parking, so I'll kind of share that around too. So I think you guys hit the nail on the head that's a huge one, and the blue lines, even I think it even goes deeper, you know, kind of within the community. People who have wheelchair vans versus those in maybe like a sedan, right? And you want to respect that spot is there, but it is very hard sometimes when you have this giant van and it's got a ramp that's supposed to come down, and even folks who are parked just a little bit close to that blue line, that clearance is really tricky. Or my other big pet peeve, I think my husband, he's just gotten used to it by now, but I obsessively move the shopping carts out of that space because I understand, you know, store employees can't do it, and folks might not be able to, once they get in their car, they've spent all of their energy, right? So that's okay, but I think that's a big thing is like, maybe if you see a shopping cart in that blue space, just, you know, if you have the ability to do so, move it inside or, you know, throw it in the cart corral because, you know, that's an extra step for that person's caregiver or for the person themselves. And then I was with this group. Do you want me to just sort of go over what we talked about? So programmatic, we talked about group homes, which is a really, really good example, and how we have folks who need to go into a group home, which is a residential living environment with supports in place that are there to meet people's needs. And they exist, but there's not enough. And so that's a huge programmatic thing because not having enough space for people to live if their loved ones or parents or caregivers can't care for them. So that's a huge one. We talked about social. Someone in our group knows someone who recently lost the ability to use their voice box, and their big adjustment to their social kind of having to communicate and things like that. And then transportation, that was our main topic. You know, it's a really big barrier, even though we think about it as a smaller thing. So there's transportation services for medical appointments, but not to go shopping or to go to meetings or community events and things like that. And how do we, you know, if people don't have family or friends who can drive them, how do we support that? One really good solution that came up for the shopping is these delivery programs, so like Shipt or Instacart. That's really booming in our communities, and that's a really common way. So basically, you do your list either online or call the store, and then they deliver it to you. And yes, it is an extra fee, but it eliminates that transportation barrier. And then I know we're sort of short on time, so I'm going to go through these other things, and then I want to leave space for more room. So if it says group activity, we might sort of skim over that. You guys are so participatory that it's been great because we've already hit some of these topics. So I just want to make sure I go over them, okay? Bias. So we already talked about this a little bit with our folks who reported out about the social barriers. So there's kind of two types of bias. And when I say bias, I mean, you know, instances where someone has a difference, whether that's the color of your skin, your ability, maybe your religion, things like that. And something either happens unconsciously or consciously to make that person feel excluded or marginalized, okay? So unconscious bias are things like maybe that person who was blind and you saying something out loud, but you didn't mean to offend them. It just sort of came out, right? And with ability and disability, we have a lot of like foot in the mouth moments. I run an amputee support group, and I said, let's give everyone a round of applause. And I have two folks with upper body extremities. I'm a social worker. I'm trained in this. It just came out, and I had another colleague who, she's like, that's okay. I told someone they were gonna get a leg up on the competition. And you know, like, it's just like, and thankfully that community is like, one of their coping mechanism is like joking, but we assume ability a lot, and even some of our phrases, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person, it just means that you have to like kind of turn your thinking cap on a little bit more when it comes to working with groups. And then there's more of the explicit bias. So those are instances where people are using derogatory terms towards people with different abilities, or purposefully excluding. And it happens a lot in schools. You know, kids get bullied, but it also happens with adults. I have a friend who has spinal muscular atrophy, so SMA, and he has been turned away from like music venues before because they're like, man, your wheelchair is going to mess up our floors. Well, it's not really allowed. But because these are small music venues, I think they sort of think that they don't have to follow the same rules as big places. So that to me is more of an explicit bias because they're excluding him out of something public because of his ability. And then just real quick, there's some statistics. I think the most shocking one for me is the rate of employment. So just show of hands, who here has a job or has been employed before? Yes, right? So yeah, who's down? Yeah, right. So I think that's a huge part is we sometimes forget that there are jobs for folks with disabilities, but the access to that is not always assumed. And it's I think employers are like in the mindset of it's a lot of extra work to employ someone where I have to maybe modify. And thankfully, workplaces are getting away from that, but the shocking is it's a gap of 41%. So between peers who don't have a documented disability and peers who have a disability, almost half of them are not employed, and most likely it's due to some of these biases and things like that. So I just kind of want you all to be mindful of that when you're engaging with your peers and congregants about jobs and stuff like that. you might be complaining about a job, right? And I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad, but, you know, I complain about my job all the time. I love my job, but it's also stressful. But I think sometimes we don't think of jobs as a privilege. We think of jobs as something we have to do, but to some folks with disabilities, that might be a privilege that they don't have access to, and sort of supporting, like, you know, using supportive language around that. And then I just wanted to real quick, and again, I know we're sort of running a little bit short on time, but we have some good amount of time left. One thing is, like, how do we approach people with either cognitive differences or disabilities? And I'm curious, when you were children, what were common things that would come up if you saw someone with special needs, maybe in a wheelchair, or someone who presented maybe like they had a cognitive impairment? So what would your mom or dad, or what would your, you know, grandparents say to you if you were curious about their ability or disability?
Don't stare.
Don't stare. That's the number one, right? Don't stare. Don't ask questions, right?
Stay away from them.
Stay away from them. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one thing I just really want to acknowledge about bias is it's not anyone's fault, because in generations we sort of pass down these things. And I think the next page, so if we want to flip to, I call it the 10 Commandments. I hope that's not offensive. So this is a really great resource that the Disability Empowerment Center has come up with, and I actually use this when I train new doctors, because even doctors who are dedicating their lives to medicine do some of these things, and so we have to, like, kind of remind them, like, you got to bring it down to a level where you're being mindful of your communication. Okay, so
That's true.
and some of you already brought up these things, so I'm really glad. It seems like this group is really mindful of kind of behavior and communication. But I'm going to go through these. So speak directly to the person. So don't talk to them. Don't go to them. You have to really work against that. So I shared with some folks, I have a little one coming in December. So if you've ever been pregnant, they want all your blood all the time, right? So I think I've been in blood draw about like 30 times this year. You know, it's probably not that many times, but I was at a blood draw, and there was a gentleman there, and he appeared like he had some communication concerns, things like that, and he was really distressed, and I couldn't see his person, and in my field, social work, that, you know, my senses go off and things like that. So I just sort of looked at him and I said, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And I think he was sort of shocked, and he couldn't communicate verbally with me, but he gave me a thumbs up, so that was great. And he had a U of M jacket on. I said, "Are you excited about football season?" And so I think for me that comes very naturally, but if you sort of see someone with a cognitive impairment that seems in distress, rather than saying it's going to be okay, or kind of talking to them in like a more childish tone, just engage them like you would normally if you feel comfortable doing so. I think, and speaking directly, so the other big thing that happens is talking to caregivers. So this happens a lot at medical appointments, but it can happen in the community too. So you're sitting with maybe your son with special needs, and the doctor or someone is directing questions only at you. And I actually have really tried to train folks to say, nope, you direct the questions at the person, and then say, is it okay if I ask so-and-so to clarify, and things like that. And folks who have done this for a long time, you can tell, because their comfort level at switching between the person and the caregiver is really great. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Offering to shake hands, I know that seems silly, but when we see people in chairs, we get that sense of like, don't touch them, but they won't break unless they have like a condition where we know their bones break. So, and if they can't shake hands or don't want to shake hands, just sort of like offering your spatial, so sort of like go into a welcoming space and don't stand way back or things like that. Identifying yourself to folks with visual impairments when you enter and leave a room. Just say, I have a really good friend that's blind, and she can recognize when I come in a room, but I'll say it's Brittany, and she's like, I know. Like, you know, it's just kind of helpful. And then someone brought this up at the beginning. So what do you do when you want to offer help to someone and you don't know how to offer that? So you see someone at Meyer, that was a really good example. They're maybe in one of the Amigos, and they can't reach something up on the tall shelf. So I make a short joke because I'm allowed to do that because I'm short. I'll say, you know, I hate when I can't reach things on the shelf, but could I grab someone for you, or like, I need something down too. Do you want me to grab it while I'm going for it? And just sort of normalize that. And I actually try to avoid using the word help. I know that sort of seems silly, but I'll say, can I, you know, what could I do for you? And then waiting for that response, I think that's the biggest thing. So one thing I will often see is people being very well-meaning, saying, here, let me help you, and moving their chair. That's like a no-no, okay? And we do go over that. So like not hanging or leaning or moving someone's wheelchair or device. Saying, do you mind if if I move past you, or could you move out of the way? Most likely they can move their own wheelchair or device, okay? So I think that's really important. Listen attentively, so just sort of engaging eye contact. If there's someone with autism, they might not do eye contact, and try not to get like that. That nervousness when someone's not, we're in our culture, we get nervous if someone doesn't give us eye contact back, just sort of, mirror their actions and things like that. And then you said speaking at eye level, so if someone's in a wheelchair or using a device, grabbing a chair yourself, it says to squat down, and sometimes to me that's more demeaning. So I'll say, hey, I'm gonna lean back or something like that, and just sort of acknowledge your body language. If someone's deaf, tapping them on the shoulder is actually okay. I think that's a common thing. So, if you meet someone with hearing impairments and they're not paying attention, it's okay to just lightly touch them and not shout. That's another big thing. And making sure you're not blocking your mouth. So if you're sort of mumbling and doing things like that, they can't read your lips. And then relax, right? That's the big thing is if you talk in a normal tone of voice and engage with someone normally, they're gonna engage with you back. And then the only other thing I just sort of wanted to go over, we're not gonna go through every single resource, but offering assistance, not only physically, but it can also be in the form of resources and things like that. So a big one that I hear from church communities is you are sitting at maybe coffee hour with a fellow member, and they're talking about their loved one who has special needs, and your heart breaks for them because you want to help them, right? And I think the main thing is just knowing the general resources and knowing where to direct someone, and then offering assistance and waiting for them to sort of get back to you. So I sort of do on the handout some tips for offering assistance. So listen and identify caregiver or individual stress or duress. So if they're expressing like frustration, it just keeps coming up. Erratic or unusual behavior. So I have a family friend who was so frustrated with that insurance thing. She went, and I think she bought like $10,000 worth of the equipment, and she didn't have $10,000 to spend. She put it all on a credit card. And my mom and I just felt very compelled to slow her down and say, don't buy things online. We can, let's work. So that's a really extreme example. But if you just notice someone's not acting like themselves, and they're a caregiver or they themselves have disability, just asking them, is there something that's stressing you out right now? And again, engaging them in that level of conversation. And then just to sort of review, I break down the resources here. And I sort of put the 3 most important places. So if anything else, the Community Mental Health, Area Agency on Aging, and the Disability Network, if you can just remember those 3 when you're talking to someone, those are places that can direct people to all the other resources that I list. So the insurance, the social security, any like financial support, things like that. And so I think just sort of to overview, when you're asking people if they want help, just remembering that you can, reference back this guide or, ask if you know someone who's in a helping position. So I know there's a couple social workers, another medical provider. Just say, where would I direct someone who needs a caregiver in their home? And they'll most likely know that, and then passing that information along. And then the biggest thing is checking back in. So validating that, like if they followed up with something, saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did that. Like, how are you feeling? Or if they didn't, doing it, supporting them through that process, okay? And then I know I blew through that, but are there any questions about resources or how to offer those or things like that? Yes, that's great. Yes, for sure. Especially for those people who are like, it's gonna take 3 weeks to get a walker through my insurance. And yeah. Yes, no, that's great to know, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a terrific challenge getting involved making sure you don't get caught in the middle of a need, a physical service need versus a miracle.
Yes, that's we can talk about that. I know we're sort of at the end of our time, but
Well, it's just the
it's very important. Yes, absolutely. So if we could all wave a magic wand and make every home accessible or take away those transportation barriers, we would, right? And so I think it's important that there's a difference between knowing and offering resources and fixing the problem for that person. Because I think what happens sometimes is if you fix a problem, it's kind of, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? Like then there's going to be another problem. And then does that fall back to you as the individual who initially helped? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like God put us on this earth to help each other. I'm a very, like, I wouldn't be in social work if I didn't believe that. But I think there is a limit to when helping sort of goes into doing, which then takes away that individuality and that independence. And I think, like you said, not trying to be a miracle worker for people, but knowing, I think, the basics about resources and stuff like that is helpful. And re-referring, I can't stress that enough. If someone didn't follow through on something, there might be a barrier, or the barrier might be they're just scared or frustrated, and it's okay to always try again, right? So. It was lovely to talk to all of you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Australia, Canada, it's very, here you have to ask for the help, and there they just lay it out for you. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, another time.
Hours of care.
All right. I will. I'll look for you, or I'll hear from you.
I'm gonna go this way so I can just look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you know him? No, what did you do?
I was.
I'm very pleased with
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh my goodness, you're a woman after my own heart then. So what is your name? Oh. You are quite, so Jenny Nelson talks very fondly of you.
Yes, absolutely.
And what is your training then? Are you
We'll see, yeah, so it's good, so thank you.
Okay, gotcha.
Say hello to the different speakers, all right?
Do you have a program?
I do.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
financing.
It's
Culturally, a lot of
So, and the other things, going to the hospital administration. That's as much.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't remember after that.
Yeah.
That's great, that I'll have to tell Dr. Rivets that. He'll be very happy. He's
He'll say, oh,
He's
that
doing
was that crazy one with it. And he was, I see what's supposed to be here.
Yeah. He's been here.
Showed her off.
Yes. Yeah. And he talks about it a bit too. Well, and Dr. Rivets, as you know, loves to do these community presentations about CP. That's, I mean, that's his baby.
So they also, I had, and we had, I can't think of her name, her husband, had social physical priest here in Ann Arbor, and she was a mover and shaker in the political scene. And she would take I was hauled through every senator's office.
Oh, goodness.
With her, to, now give us your sales pitch, Marge, on what this thing. And we were fighting at the time. We were fighting her guts.
Yes.
Can you believe that? Well, now.
Well, now I feel like small potatoes talking to you, but thank you for all your work. I mean, I can't, you gave the
just old, that's it. I've just been around a long
Well,
time, but
I hope I
I'm
can,
I'm taking a turn. I live in Wrinkle Village.
Wrinkle Village, listen to her.
Are you social worker as well?
No, I'm not a social worker. I had good friends and
In administration.
and I think of her maiden name. Her name is Carrie. She lives in New York now, but she was the social worker. Was the original one of all these.
Do you know that, that Bernard didn't have an outpatient social worker until I started there about 3 years ago?
Yeah. They were, I think they had a big internal fight. What were they going to have to give, what was the medical school going to charge them for, and how were they going to have fun?
Well, it was me.
Follow the money. It all
Well,
goes.
they only paid for half.
Yeah.
And I hope this is good for you to hear, but I also stormed some conferences and board nights. It's not fair, and I only do pediatrics, so they're finally slowly.
Yeah, well, pediatrics, of course, we had social work way back, but it was, the Brits say they organized and budgeted, and that was an important aspect of what they wanted to accomplish, and so
We're working on it.
but the other folks said, oh, no, we'd rather have a new device to measure neurons.
So yes. No, yeah. I've had that talk a couple times.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Well, thank you again.
You want all your pens back?
I'll take some of them.
Leave what you want.
Great, so I thank you so much. I wanted to just say that I am a school nurse in Ann Arbor, and I would love for you to come and speak at our staff meetings if you ever can do that. I know your baby's coming soon.
Not till December,
Yeah.
what school is it?
So I'm in Ann Arbor, so we'll be all the nurses in our district.
Yeah.
And then
And what is your name?
some Keeley
Keeley, okay.
Hoffman, and
Okay.
I think, we think as nurses we know all these things, but we have quite a few, there's only 12 of us in the whole district, but some of them, we have about 3 new ones. And they came from, some came from Michigan, but some have never worked in
Can I write it
school
down on
setting.
this
Yes,
actually for you?
please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Some have never worked, do you mind on the front page? I'm sure I am. Some have never worked in the school settings, I think sometimes there's just resources and I don't know.
I have a burial that's a little more like medical,
Yes.
how would I call it? It's more instrumental and equipment based. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
And then I also like just a simple, a few pointers of maybe introduction. Start out by saying how to talk to people. Like something. I did myself. I did this. No, I won't. No. I won't. Believe me, I know how that is. I did find yourself saying, well, I have many students. or whatever. That's my contact that. Yeah, I should be using. This is how we should contact.
Yeah, if you want to,
anyone who's just a refresher.
yeah, if you want to take here, I'll give you a couple extras, and then if you want to attend here.
Sure, thank you. That would be great. So,
Even if they're like, no, we don't want to, which would be, this is sort of that. So a lot of those. Yeah, I love to. I work with the Ann Arbor Public Schools for adoption. Do you have Ann Bergen?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, someone, sorry, I talked to her a couple of less so than her,
I usually do the social worker.
yeah, social worker, teachers, or things like that. And then, my kids mainly are, TP or other learning concerns or things like that. Yeah, so I do
Sort of one school that has the
High Point, right? Yeah, well, and he's like yes, too, you're
yeah,
right.
High Point is separate from me.
Yes, okay. Oh, that's right, there, that's right.
Yeah, that's okay. But Easley is definitely the one, but we also have our middle school sports side, as well. Yep, and then we're starting to kind of integrate one of those kids.
I love it. Ann Arbor Public Schools
Yeah.
does a really good job of
Yeah.
that. I actually,
Thank you.
I always joke, if my sister was at Ann Arbor Public Schools, she'd be at Forsyth or whatever, just in a classroom and now
Yeah.
Yeah, but, yeah, I would love to,
want
yeah,
a
demonstrate to
environment, but
I was
yeah.
just wondering what.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Listening to in a debate about texture for all.
Yes, no, that's so important. So, yeah, so I mean, like I said,
It's okay, I mean, he went to increase the amount there, but of course I'd like to understand.
I think it's difficult, right? So there is a really great resource in it's let's see if I can find it. Sorry, I hate to be that person that Googles stuff, but yes, I will write it down for you. Do you do stuff online?
Yeah, I do that in my own computer, but I have to do it.
Perfect. So it's but if you want to, yeah, sure. If you don't mind, here, I can definitely. Well, here, are these yours? Though?
Yeah.
Let me write it down on mine. Okay. Yeah. So basically,
Here's the note. Right here.
oh, okay. So long story short, I don't want to speak on behalf of the. Okay. Yeah. At Yahoo. Okay. I can email you the website.
Yeah.
So the Medicare for All is one of those tricky things. I think it's one of those things that in a perfect world we would have that kind of public. I don't know if we'll quite get to it, but the things that the disability community and the medical community are really not supporting candidates who want to like turn stuff over to insurance companies, right? So that sort of visit. Well, because we're kind of coming back to an age, it's been going like this, where they're trying to put more of those restrictions on pre-existing conditions. So for folks with disabilities, that would be devastating. I think the other piece is, like insurance. Yes, yep, and I think that is the so candidates. So like, what I think Biden's or Bernie Sanders is like in my world is like the dream.
Yeah.
But Biden's and other folks who are sort of more talking about this expansion of Medicaid services, that would, or keeping it expanded, because the last thing we want is for the progress that was made with expanding Medicaid services to go away, because there is such a big health crisis. And I think the other key part is the mental health care. Sometimes that gets left out of the debates. And people with disabilities have mental health too, right? And so, you have a kid with autism who needs to go inpatient, and they can only go inpatient if they go to a certain hospital So we really want that sort of keeping care in silos to like go away or at least like not get worse, right? Yeah, so I would love to email this to you. Okay. I'm gonna actually take a picture of my phone just in case this. Yeah. I hope this was helpful.
Oh, yeah, and I was just going over it. I mean, I know.
I know, but there's a lot this year.
I mean, we'll have to go through.
Well, not this year, but next
our
year.
representatives, and I just want to make
Yeah, no, it's very hard, yeah.
And-
Well, and I try not to get too political, but it's hard when you're, you know, if you're trying to be a good advocate.
And when you know what's happening in Australia.
Yes, yeah,